The hypersonic phase just started, not with missiles, not with warships, but with policy. A document, a plan, quietly approved, but massively consequential. China's new 5-year plan is not just economic strategy, it's a blueprint for reshaping global power. And the United States is already calling it what it really is, a trade war escalation, engineered at the highest level, because this isn't just about growth targets or industrial policy. This is about control over supply chains, control over resources, and ultimately, control over the future of the global financial system. Here's the reality. A single policy framework coming out of Beijing can now challenge a system built over decades by the world's most powerful economy. That's the David versus Goliath moment. But here's the twist. This time David isn't small anymore. And that's why this matters. Because when the world's second largest economy begins executing a long-term strategic plan designed to reduce dependence on the global system, it doesn't just create competition, it creates fragmentation. And fragmentation is how global systems break. Now let's go deeper. China's 5-year plan is not a normal economic roadmap. It's a coordinated, state-driven strategy targeting key sectors that define modern power: semiconductors, artificial intelligence, energy, advanced manufacturing. These are not random industries. These are the pillars of the next global order. Billions, in some cases trillions of dollars, are being directed into these sectors. State subsidies, strategic investments, national-level coordination. This is not free market competition. This is industrial warfare. And here's the critical point. China is not just trying to compete within the existing system. It's trying to build its own. Look at semiconductors. For years, China has depended on foreign technology, especially from the United States and its allies. But that dependency is now seen as a vulnerability. So what's the response? Massive investment, domestic production, supply chain independence. Because in modern geopolitics, chips are power. Control the chips, control the system. Now move to energy. China is aggressively expanding renewable energy, electric vehicles, and battery production. Not just for environmental reasons, but for strategic dominance. Because energy independence reduces vulnerability, and dominance in new energy technologies creates leverage. Now look at trade. China is building alternative trade networks, strengthening regional alliances, expanding influence through infrastructure projects. This is not just economics, this is strategy, a long-term plan to reshape global trade flows. Now here's the contrast that defines this entire situation. On one side you have the United States, a system built on market dynamics, global integration, and financial dominance through the dollar. On the other side you have China, a system built on state control, long-term planning, and strategic allocation of resources. Two fundamentally different models. And now, they are colliding. This is not a traditional trade war. This is a systemic competition. And the battlefield is not just tariffs or exports. It's technology, it's infrastructure, it's money. Now let's talk about the hidden financial layer behind all of this. Because this conflict is not just about goods and services. It's about the structure of the global financial system itself. The current system is dominated by the US dollar. Trade is settled in dollars. Reserves are held in dollars. Financial flows move through dollar-based systems. This gives the United States immense power. But it also creates dependency. And dependency creates vulnerability. China understands this. That's why part of its long-term strategy is reducing reliance on the dollar, expanding the use of its own currency, building alternative payment systems, creating financial networks that operate outside traditional Western control. This is not an overnight shift. It's gradual, strategic. But once it reaches a tipping point, it accelerates. Now connect this to history. Because this pattern has played out before. Look at the rise of the United States in the early 20th century. As Britain's financial system weakened under the pressure of war and debt, a new system emerged. The dollar replaced the pound. That transition wasn't immediate. It took decades. But the shift was inevitable once the underlying financial structures changed. Now look at today. The United States still dominates, but its system is under pressure. Rising debt, increasing geopolitical tensions, growing fragmentation. At the same time, China is building an alternative. This is the pattern. An existing empire facing a rising challenger. And at the center of that competition is money. Because financial systems determine power, not just economic power, geopolitical power. Now go even further back. Empires throughout history have relied on control of key resources and trade routes. Rome controlled grain, Britain controlled shipping lanes. Today, control is more complex. It's about supply chains, technology, data, and financial systems. China's 5-year plan targets all of these areas. Simultaneously, this is not coincidence. This is design. Now let's talk about the risks. Because when two systems compete at this level, stability is the first casualty. Trade becomes uncertain. supply chains become fragmented, markets become volatile, and financial systems become stressed. This is already happening. Tariffs, restrictions, sanctions, export controls. Each move adds pressure. Each response escalates the situation. This is the definition of escalation. And escalation rarely reverses easily. Now consider the global impact. Countries are being forced to choose sides, align with one system or the other. This creates division, and division weakens the global system, because the current system depends on integration. Remove that integration and efficiency declines. Costs rise, stability decreases. Now combine this with existing financial pressures. Global debt at record levels. Inflation still a concern. Central banks under pressure. And you get a system already strained, facing additional shocks. This is what makes this moment so dangerous. Because it's not just one issue. It's multiple pressures, converging at the same time. Now let's look forward. In the next 24 to 72 hours, headlines will focus on policy reactions, statements, diplomatic responses, market movements. But the real shift is long-term, because strategies like this don't play out in days. They play out in years. And once they begin, they are difficult to reverse. In the long term, we are likely to see increased fragmentation of the global system, multiple financial centers, competing trade networks, reduced dependence on a single dominant currency. This is not necessarily collapse, but it is transformation. And transformation creates uncertainty. Now here's the final warning. China's 5-year plan is not just an economic document. It's a signal that the global system is entering a new phase, a phase defined by competition, fragmentation, and strategic positioning. And history is very clear about one thing. When systems enter this phase, they do not remain stable, they evolve, or they break. The only question is this: are we witnessing the controlled rise of a new global order, or the early stages of a conflict that will reshape power, money, and markets for decades to come?